The largest island in Lake Michigan, and an island with a colorful history. A rogue king, a brawling priest, an unlicensed doctor, ethnic cleansing, a small railroad, and Irish refugees. The island even had marauding pirates and assassination and violent skirmishes. But today, islanders wave at you as they drive by. The rugged isolation meets small town charm. A place where you can live your life without boundaries, without the constraints of the mainland. I'm Chuck.
I'm Poppins.
The channel's Restless Viking. Let's go explore Beaver Island's history.
And on the other side.
So we made it to Beaver Island. When you fly Island Airlines, you come to Welke Airport. But now, in that pile of cars is our rental. I'm not really sure where it's parked. So we're looking for a maroon Blazer. So Poppins was right. There is a special rental car reserved parking. So rumor has it, Poppins, that the keys are somewhere in the car, and you kind of play a little game called Find the Keys. Nothing? Nothing? Oh, and then didn't you try the cup holder?
Oh, and now to the grocery store to buy some wine.
You got the old service engine soon and anti-lock brakes. Actually, if you come out to a place like Beaver and expect a brand new rental, you're crazy. Next stop is supplies.
Wine.
It's Strang. How are you?
Hi.
Yeah, very strategic. Only one bottle, Poppins?
Yeah, that's enough for one day. And they're only open 1 hour tomorrow from 11 to noon.
So let's start at the beginning. 11,000 years ago, the Wisconsin ice sheet left this area. A lake popped up, but then also Beaver Island popped up. From 4,000 to 8,000 years ago, Beaver Island wasn't an island at all. It was a peninsula because the lake level had dropped, but then it went up and it went down. And 4,000 years ago, a glacier that scooped up rocks from the Canadian Shield somewhere in Ontario kind of was down in this area, and it dropped a big rock. This is what is known on Beaver Island as the big rock. And it's a glacial erratic. It's brought from somewhere else, and that's pre-Cambrian rock there. That's some of the Earth's oldest rock, and it doesn't match the bedrock in this area. So this glacier picked it up, brought it here, and just dropped it. And today you can visit the big rock on Fox Lake Road, which is a little muddy. And to think that they had the foresight to actually name it
The Big Rock.
And just a little ways down the road from the big rock is a large 250 to 300-year-old birch tree that is considered the biggest birch tree in Michigan. And I don't know anything about its history, but it is a mighty big birch tree. You can make a lot of canoes out of that, Poppins. Still snow here in early April.
The first humans that set foot on this land was 2,200 years ago. And we know this because pottery was found, arrowheads. It looks like the native tribes had just been passing through.
And then when Europeans started landing on the east coast of North America, and the Odawa started retreating in small waves. And in the mid-1700s, they landed here. And in 1832, Father Barriga started converting the indigenous people to Catholicism, except for the people that lived here. Trappers and traders started showing up here in the early 1800s. And Mackinac Island and Beaver Island became the two economic powerhouses of this wilderness area. And the traders started bringing furs here to sell. And the biggest commodity they had in this particular location was whiskey. Hence the name Whiskey Point. And by 1850, about 100 people lived here. And by 1856, St. James Harbor was a harbor of refuge, so they had to build a lighthouse. But what those 100 people didn't know in 1850 was that their lives were about to change. because over there were a few Mormons that began settling. And their leader, James Strang, had plans.
So today at Whiskey Point, you can find the St. James Township Hall, Central Michigan University's Research Center, the Harbor Point Lighthouse, and you will find the memorial to all the Beaver Islanders who have died on the Great Lakes. So some of Strang's followers came here in 1848. There's a lot to the history about King Strang. We'll get into that later.
James Jesse Strang was a controversial figure in the early Latter-day Saints movement. After the death of their first leader, Joseph Smith, Strang and a few others tried to take charge of the Mormon church, and Brigham Young got most of the followers to go to Utah, to Salt Lake City. But Strang brought some people here to Beaver Island, and he called Beaver Island his Zion. And in 1850, in an unusual ceremony here in the island, he was crowned king of his religion. In fact, he had a red robe with white fur and black speckles. He had a breastplate, a wooden scepter, and a tin crown with glass jewels in it. And what's left here on Beaver Island is the Mormon print shop, where they used to publish a Mormon newspaper that was widely circulated around northern Michigan. Eventually, Strang brought about 2,200 followers here, and although he never claimed to crown himself king of Beaver Island, the fact is that he ruled his followers, and he started to rule the island residents by trying to crowd them out and trying to make them follow the laws of the Mormon church. So eventually, after about 6 years of that type of rule, he wasn't very well liked. And then there were claims of piracy, property theft, violence, and all kinds of activity. Trouble eventually led to what was called the War of Whiskey Island. And from this location, King Strang noticed that a group of Gentile rebels were gathering over there at Whiskey Point. And from here, they fired a cannon at the group that was gathering. And of course, because they had a cannon, they won the war. And there were other shots exchanged, and all of these tensions escalated. And even President Fillmore sent people to get him under control. But it really didn't work until 1856. And at 7 a.m. on June 16th, 1856, two former Strangites, Thomas Bedford and Alexander Wentworth, approached Strang from behind as he went down this hill to have dinner with the captain of the USS Wolverine, which was docked here. And officers and sailors of the USS Wolverine watched everything unfold from the decks of the ship. The two assailants shot Strang 3 times, and one of them pistol whipped him. And then they claimed sanctuary on the USS Wolverine, a U.S. government ship. And despite the pleadings of the sheriff, the captain of the USS Wolverine left the docks and went to Mackinac Island, where the two assailants were tried and fined $1.50 each and set free. And Strang, who was still alive, was brought to Voorhees, Wisconsin, where he died on July 5th. And there's still some situations going on in the island still today. And what happened next was called the most disgraceful day in Michigan history by Byron Cutchin, a Michigan historian. Gentiles from Mackinac Island and surrounding islands boarded ferries, and they arrived at Beaver Island as a drunk mob. And they laid waste to the Mormon homesteads, and they pulled people out of their houses, they burned their belongings, they stole their belongings, and they loaded them all onto steamers and sent them to different parts of the Great Lakes and told them to get lost. All 2,200 Mormons were eventually chased off the island. After 8 years, the Mormons had created a moderate civilization, and now they were all gone. But there were still homesteads and cleared land left. Some say, though, the Mormons stole everything they needed to create that society, so it's fair game. A most interesting chapter of Beaver Island's history ends And before we go on with Beaver Island's history, Poppins, what are we gonna go do next?
We're going to weasel our way into a community event. They have a family movie night here on the island.
Hello, this young lady would like a large popcorn. We know you're still making it.
Yeah.
Can you bring it in?
We'll bring it in and then we'll wave you down.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good.
So it might be dark in there by then.
And then
all right.
2 fountain drinks if we could.
Okay.
In 1851, they finished the first lighthouse in the southern end of Beaver Island. Poppins and I made our journey south here to the tower. And we're checking out the light tower. That first tower, 7 years after it was built, it actually toppled over and then slid down from its foundation toward the water. And they built the second one here. Became a school for the Charlevoix Public Schools, and they brought students out here for field trips and for study. And it closed down a few years ago. And during the summer, you can actually go up into the tower. I don't think it's open today, though. It's a nice little sandy beach here by the lighthouse. I'm not sure, but I think that might be where the boathouse was for the landing. We'll go check it out. So this is the fog signal building. Had to generate a lot of steam to get that horn or that whistle. Looks like part of the former school that was here. Those campers would have had a great view for sure.
In 1845, the Great Potato Famine brought a bunch of Irish people here to Beaver Island, like about 100 or so. And then they would write back to their family, "You've got to see America's Emerald Isle." So many of the more Irish came in waves. So this island offered protection from prejudice for the Irish. They spoke Gaelic here. Masses were said in Gaelic. In 1880, there were 881 people on this island, with 141 Gallaghers, 123 Boyles, and 90 were O'Donnells.
So you take Poppins' point, of course. 40% of the island was made up of 3 Irish names. And in 1880, the rich fishing grounds around the island made Beaver Island the largest provider of freshwater fish in the United States. And you can see that heritage here at the Beaver Island Maritime Museum. It's closed right now, but in the summer, it's a fascinating walkthrough, and you can even explore that old fishing boat. But the invention of the steamboat allowed mainland fishermen to come out to their fishing grounds and to basically fish them and then be home by the evening. It's a rudder. And by 1893, production of fishing here on Beaver Island had declined to about half. Now, the Irish persona was and is very present here. And in 1865, a priest, Father Peter Gallagher, arrived, and he was the antithesis of the Irish personality. He was a dispute settler, a money loaner. He carried on with a bachelor's, bought land. He owned a merchant ship, and he hunted and fished. And in fact, he won a team of horses in a marksmanship bet, and he once got in a fight with a parishioner, causing St. Ignatius Chapel to be closed down because he drew blood. Now, the bishop sent some men to oust Father Peter Gallagher, but his parishioners wouldn't let the men off the boat. They sent them packing, and Father Peter Gallagher got to stay here until he died in 1898. And then there was Fyodor Protar. He was a newspaper editor and an actor that was born into the Russian Empire. He wanted to practice some of the teachings of Tolstoy's religious movement. So he bought a place and he moved to Beaver Island. And he took up residence in this old cabin. And he worked to be self-sufficient. And he tried to do good for everyone that he met. And he even performed medical services for people, especially for those that couldn't afford it or were too far away from St. James to get it. And the medical services that he provided were so important that it looks like the state of Michigan just kind of looked the other way, even though he was an unlicensed physician. So he became known as Dr. Protar, and he objected to that. He practiced pharmacology from the plants that he grew, and he even purchased medicine in bulk. Fyodor Protar died in 1925 of a stroke in this cabin. Protar had written arrangements for his death when he died, and he said no coffin, no black dress, no grave digging, no flowers are necessary. One strong bag and a heavy stone will cover all requirements, and 4 friends in summer to row, in winter to drive me out onto the ice and let me slip into the water is all what is necessary. The state of Michigan didn't allow for water burials though, so instead the Islanders placed him here. This is Protar's tomb. It's obviously a sad day when for the Islanders when Protar died. The Islanders took up a collection to build this tomb, and they maintain it to this day. The year-round residents of Beaver Island are nice, sure, but even a random conversation with the bartender can turn into something unexpected and amazing. In our case, we were invited by Paul and Angel Welke for a visit that became a few hours of amazing conversation and the highlight of our trip.
When I was 15 in 1965, I started learning to fly. And that summer, my birthday is on September 5th. I soloed on my birthday, which is the earliest you can.
Is that right? Wow.
And so, so I got my private license in like April of '67, and I was 17. I was still in high school.
Yeah, whenever anyone would owe money, big Paul Barron, just tall, big, burly guy, Betty would call him on the radio, Paul, I would like George on my side of the plane. So that meant he had to pull the plane up and Betty would open the door and say, George, you owe me $41.
Paul has been flying commercially since 1972 and has made more than 35,000 trips between Beaver Island and Charlevoix.
Another unique thing we do, we're approved to provide air ambulance service just for Beaver Island.
Angel organizes hundreds of passenger and freight flights every year. They have built an impressive airport on this remote island.
So this is the front part of the parts room. And we have so many parts, we had to add a storage container. The island. So this is the rest of the...
Is it just because it's a storage container? Paul took the time to show us his impressive collection of wartime history.
Had to resign their commission, their Army and Navy pilots.
The cabinet that was down there.
We talked for hours about life, our passions, and even dogs. Paul and Angel are a lifeline for the residents of the island. But they also represent what I can only describe as a family of people that call Beaver Island home.
But when they tried to pin him down...
And then in 1902, the Beaver Island Lumber Company was formed, and timber has been a commodity of this island for quite a while. They still ship it out today. And to move logs around on Beaver Island, they actually built a small railroad, which I think is pretty cool. And you can still see the railroad in some places. You can see the Swede hole, or the grade that was created for the railroad, which headed west from St. James Bay to the north shore of Font Lake and then south on the west shore of Font Lake. That's quite a little interesting piece of history for a small island like this to have a railroad. It doesn't exist anymore, but I think up by some of the museums you can see the machinery. And as you would imagine, those railroads that were built by the lumber company, because they're a lumber company, not a railroad, were not the best maintained. And David Chase, who was an engineer on the Beaver Island Limited, on April 17th of 1908, the tracks kind of gave way and there was a derailment, and he was killed when the engine rolled over on him. And this is his memorial on where that happened. And we are back at Welke Field for our trip home. This video was just a brief history of what Beaver Island offers. Stay tuned. This summer we're gonna head back when more things open up and kind of get going. But for now, we're gonna take probably a bumpy ride back. It's pretty windy out, so it should be a blast. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chuck.
I'm Poppins.
Channel's Restless Viking. We'll see you soon.